Charlotte, North Carolina, a city of charm and sophistication, known for its bustling cityscape and serene suburban neighborhoods. Among its crown jewels was Oakwood Drive, a street lined with luxurious homes, each meticulously maintained, a testament to the lives of affluence that thrived within. Yet on one fateful evening, the tranquility of this exclusive enclave shattered, replaced by the flashing red and blue lights of police vehicles and the murmur of neighbors exchanging hushed speculations. The focal point of the commotion was a sprawling two-story house, its pristine white exterior now marked with yellow caution tape. Officers moved methodically, canvassing the area as crime scene investigators swarmed the property. Inside, what had once been a picture-perfect home now harbored a grim secret. Blood pooled on the polished oak floor, a stark and chilling contrast to the elegant decor. Sophia Carter was the woman at the heart of this tragedy. At 32, she was a paragon of charm and competence, a real estate agent who knew how to close deals and win hearts with her effortless smile. She had built a reputation as one of the best in Charlotte, a woman who could sell even the most challenging properties. But beneath her polished exterior lay a woman yearning for something more, something she couldn't define but felt acutely. Sophia's husband, Ethan Carter, was a man of precision and control. At 34, he had climbed the ranks of investment banking, thriving in a world of high-stakes deals and relentless pressure. With his tailored suits, a commanding presence, and an enviable home, Ethan epitomized success. Yet, his eyes often betrayed a quiet intensity, a man who carried the weight of his own expectations and a need for order in all things. Then there was Ryan Carter, Ethan's younger brother. At 29, Ryan was everything Ethan was not, free-spirited, passionate, and often reckless. A struggling musician, Ryan lacked the stability and discipline of his older brother but compensated with a magnetic charm that could light up any room. To Ethan, Ryan was a wild card, an unwelcome reminder of the life Ethan had chosen to leave behind. To Sophia, however, Ryan was something else entirely, a breath of fresh air. The three lives intertwined within the Carter family created a dynamic that was as intricate as it was volatile. Sophia and Ethan's marriage, though outwardly perfect, carried unspoken fractures. Ethan's constant work commitments left Sophia feeling isolated, while her own success seemed to highlight the emotional distance between them. Ryan's frequent visits to the Carter household, initially a source of familial bonding, became the catalyst for a connection Sophia hadn't anticipated. Neighbors often remarked on the Carters' seemingly perfect life, with Ethan's polished demeanor, Sophia's effortless grace, and Ryan's lively spirit. No one could have predicted the darkness brewing within the walls of their immaculate home. But as the police worked tirelessly that night, piecing together the clues of a crime that defied their tranquil surroundings, one truth was undeniable: the Carters' carefully curated facade had cracked, revealing the raw and chilling reality beneath. What had happened in that house on Oakwood Drive? What secrets had unraveled to lead to such devastation? As the night deepened and the investigators delved into the grim scene, the once perfect image of the Carter family dissolved into a haunting question: how well do we truly know the ones we hold closest? It started innocently enough, as such things often do. Ryan Carter's visits to his brother's home were a regular occurrence, a dynamic born from a blend of family loyalty and Ryan's transient lifestyle. With no fixed address and a music career that oscillated between small gigs and long stretches of struggle, Ryan often found himself crashing at Ethan and Sophia's expansive house on Oakwood Drive. It was a practical arrangement, but one that would soon prove anything but. Sophia, ever the gracious host, had always welcomed Ryan's presence. His carefree attitude was a sharp contrast to Ethan's meticulous and often rigid nature, a fact that hadn't escaped her notice. While Ethan spent long hours at the bank, diving into spreadsheets and sealing deals, Ryan filled the house with an energy that seemed to light up even its quietest corners. He played his guitar on the patio, told outrageous stories over dinner, and had a knack for making Sophia laugh in a way she hadn't in years. At first, their interactions were casual. Sophia found it easy to enjoy Ryan's company in the way one might appreciate the warmth of a fire on a cold evening, comforting but not consuming. They talked about his music, her work, and the future. Ryan, ever the dreamer, painted vivid pictures of a life unburdened by schedules and expectations. Sophia, tethered by her responsibilities and an increasingly distant marriage, found herself drawn to his vision, even if only in her imagination. The shift from casual camaraderie to something deeper was subtle. It began with small moments, a lingering glance, a brush of hands as they passed each other in the kitchen, a shared laugh that lingered just a bit too long. Ryan's gaze held a kind of intensity that made Sophia feel seen in a way she hadn't for years. And Ryan, for all his charm, was not oblivious to the way Sophia's smile softened when she spoke to him, or how her eyes lit up when he played her favorite songs. It wasn't until a quiet afternoon, when the house was empty save for the two of them, that the unspoken tension between them came to a head. Ryan had been strumming his guitar on the patio, humming a melody Sophia recognized from one of his recent gigs. She wandered out, wine glass in hand, and took a seat nearby. "Play that one again," she said, her voice light but carrying a note of something deeper. "It's beautiful." Ryan grinned, his fingers dancing over the strings as he began the tune anew. The music filled the air between them, a bridge neither had dared to cross until that moment. When he finished, Sophia clapped softly, her smile genuine. "You're really talented, you know," she said, her tone warm. "Ethan doesn't say it, but I think he's proud of you." Ryan snorted, leaning back in his chair. "Ethan's proud of his spreadsheets and his 5-year plans. I don't think I fit into either." The comment hung in the air, and Sophia hesitated before responding. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." Their eyes met then, and the connection that had simmered beneath the surface flared to life. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the electric charge of their shared gaze. It was Ryan who leaned in first, his expression both tentative and certain. Sophia didn't pull away. The kiss was brief but seismic, a crack in the foundation of everything they knew. When it ended, they pulled back, both wide-eyed and breathless. Neither spoke, but the unspoken agreement was clear: what had just happened could not be undone. In the days that followed, they were careful. They spoke in whispers, exchanged furtive glances, and found excuses to steal moments alone. Their affair, while still in its infancy, carried the heady thrill of secrecy and the undeniable pull of forbidden desire. They met in out-of-the-way coffee shops, exchanged coded text messages, and lived for the moments when Ethan's absence gave them space to explore what they had discovered in each other. But with every clandestine meeting, the stakes grew higher. Sophia was acutely aware of the risks, of what she stood to lose if Ethan ever found out. Yet, as much as she tried to rationalize, to convince herself to stop, she couldn't deny the pull Ryan had on her. For Ryan, the thrill of their connection was intoxicating, but so too was the growing depth of his feelings for Sophia. He wasn't just infatuated, he was falling in love. What neither of them realized was that the walls of the Carter home, though outwardly solid, were beginning to crack under the weight of their secrets. The foundation they were building their relationship on was inherently unstable, and the storm brewing on the horizon was one that would leave no one untouched. What began as an intoxicating escape quickly turned into a delicate and dangerous balancing act. Sophia and Ryan's affair, once fueled by the thrill of secrecy, started to weigh heavily on them both. The spark of passion that had ignited their relationship was now joined by the creeping shadows of guilt, fear, and frustration. For Sophia, the stakes felt impossibly high. Every glance at Ethan's stoic face, every quiet dinner shared in their pristine dining room, was a reminder of what she risked losing. Ethan wasn't just her husband, he was the foundation of the life she had built. Their luxurious home, their social status, even her career to some extent, were all tied to him. Yet, the idea of ending things with Ryan felt equally unbearable. He had awakened something in her, a part of herself she hadn't realized she'd buried beneath years of polite smiles and societal expectations. Ryan, on the other hand, was growing restless. The secrecy that had once excited him now felt suffocating. He wasn't just sneaking around with Sophia for the thrill of it, he loved her. He wanted a life with her, a future that wasn't hidden in shadows and stolen moments. But every time he tried to bring it up, to push Sophia to make a choice, he was met with hesitation. One evening, as they sat together in his car parked at a secluded overlook, Ryan finally voiced what had been building inside him. "Sophia," he began, his voice low but insistent, "I can't keep doing this. Sneaking around, lying, it's not who I am. I need to know, are we ever going to have a real chance? Or is this all we'll ever be?" Sophia looked at him, her expression a mix of sorrow and frustration. "You think I don't want that too?" she said, her voice trembling. "Do you have any idea how hard this is for me? If I leave Ethan, I lose everything. My home, my reputation, everything I've worked for." Ryan's jaw tightened, and he turned to look out at the city lights below. "And what about us? What about me? Am I just supposed to be your secret forever? I love you, Sophia, but I need more than this." The word love hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Sophia felt her heart ache at the raw emotion in his voice. She reached out, her hand resting on his. "Ryan," she whispered, "I love you too. But it's not that simple." The tension between them only grew in the weeks that followed. Ryan became more insistent, his frustration manifesting in pointed remarks and strained silences. Sophia, feeling cornered, started to pull away, fearing that their affair was spiraling out of control. Their once effortless connection now felt like a fragile thread, stretched thin by their conflicting desires and the realities of their situation. Their arguments became more frequent, each one leaving deeper wounds. During one particularly heated exchange, Ryan snapped, "Do you even want to be with me? Or am I just some escape for you when your perfect life with Ethan gets boring?" Sophia recoiled as if struck, her eyes filling with tears. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "You know how much you mean to me." "Then prove it," Ryan shot back, his voice breaking. "Leave him. Be with me." But Sophia couldn't give him the answer he wanted. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving Ryan alone in the quiet of the night, his heart heavy with disappointment and doubt. The strain on their relationship began to show in other ways. Ryan's usually vibrant performances at local gigs became lackluster, his songs tinged with melancholy. Sophia, once confident and composed, found herself distracted at work, her mind constantly occupied with thoughts of Ryan and Ethan. The guilt of living a double life started to erode her from the inside, making her question not just her choices but her own identity. Yet, despite the mounting tension, neither of them could bring themselves to end it. For all the pain and uncertainty, the moments they shared were still electric, still worth the risk. They were trapped in a cycle of longing and regret, unable to move forward but unwilling to let go. Unbeknownst to them, the walls of their fragile world were closing in. Ethan, sharp and observant as ever, had started to notice the subtle changes in Sophia's behavior, the way she seemed distant, the late-night texts she tried to hide, the way she tensed when Ryan's name came up in conversation. While neither Sophia nor Ryan knew it yet, the foundation of their secret was beginning to crack, and the consequences of their actions were looming closer than they realized. Ethan Carter was a man of precision. In his world of numbers and high-stakes deals, nothing escaped his notice. He prided himself on his ability to read between the lines, to identify patterns and discrepancies where others saw nothing. It was this skill that had built his success, but now, it began to reveal fractures in the very foundation of his personal life. At first, the changes in Sophia seemed subtle, almost dismissible. She was distracted, her laughter a little more forced, her phone never far from her grasp. Ethan noticed how she would smile at her screen, then quickly set it down when he walked into the room. Her excuses for late meetings and extended hours at work were plausible enough, but they came more frequently than ever before. Ethan's instincts stirred uneasily, though he couldn't quite put his finger on the reason. Was it paranoia? Stress from his demanding career? Or was there something real beneath the surface of his unease? He decided not to act immediately, instead opting to watch and wait, letting the pieces fall into place. The breakthrough came one evening when Sophia returned home later than usual, her face flushed, her demeanor uncharacteristically flustered. Ethan greeted her casually, noting how she avoided his gaze and offered a hurried explanation about a last-minute client dinner. As she moved past him, he caught a faint whiff of a familiar cologne, one he knew didn't belong to him. His mind raced, connecting this with the small inconsistencies he had noticed in recent weeks. The picture that began to form was one he didn't want to acknowledge. Ethan's suspicions grew sharper after that night. He began paying closer attention, noting how Sophia seemed to light up when Ryan was around, her laughter a little too free, her touch lingering just a moment longer than necessary. Ryan, oblivious to Ethan's scrutiny, acted as if nothing was amiss. But Ethan's mind was already piecing the puzzle together. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan took a calculated step. He hired a private investigator. The decision wasn't easy. There was a part of him that still hoped he was wrong, that his instincts had led him astray. But the weight of uncertainty was too much to bear. The investigator, a seasoned professional, assured Ethan of discretion and efficiency. Within days, the surveillance began. The results came faster than Ethan had anticipated. The investigator provided photos, timestamps, and text messages that painted a damning picture of betrayal. Images of Sophia and Ryan meeting at a coffee shop, their faces too close, their smiles too intimate. Text messages filled with coded language but unmistakable in their intent. The evidence was clear, Sophia and Ryan were having an affair. Ethan's world, carefully constructed and meticulously maintained, crumbled around him. But he didn't react with the fiery rage one might expect. Instead, his response was chilling in its calmness. He thanked the investigator, carefully filed the evidence away, and poured himself a drink. The betrayal stung deeply, but beneath the pain was a simmering determination. If Sophia and Ryan thought they could deceive him, they were sorely mistaken. Ethan didn't just want answers, he wanted control. The confrontation came a few nights later. Sophia walked into the house after another late meeting, only to find Ethan waiting for her in the living room. The folder of evidence lay on the coffee table, its contents partially visible. Ethan's face was composed, but his eyes burned with intensity. "Sit down, Sophia," he said, his voice low and steady. Sophia hesitated, her eyes flicking to the folder. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan gestured to the chair across from him. "I think you know." Her hands shook as she lowered herself into the seat. Ethan opened the folder, pulling out the photos first. One by one, he placed them on the table in front of her. Sophia's face went pale as she recognized the images. Her mouth opened to speak, but no words came out. "I had my suspicions," Ethan began, his tone devoid of emotion. "But I wanted to be sure. These confirmed it." Sophia tried to deny it at first, stammering about misunderstandings and doctored images. But when Ethan pulled out the text messages, the truth became undeniable. She broke down, tears streaming down her face as she begged for forgiveness, insisting the affair had meant nothing and that she still loved him. Ethan listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he stood and walked toward the window, staring out at the darkened street. "You've shattered my trust," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "And that's something I can't forgive." Sophia sobbed, pleading for a chance to make things right, but Ethan didn't respond. In his mind, the wheels were already turning. He didn't want apologies or explanations. What he wanted now was something far darker, a plan to regain control and exact retribution. As he left the room, leaving Sophia alone with her guilt and despair, one thing was clear: Ethan wasn't the kind of man to let betrayal go unanswered. Ethan Carter had always been a man of careful planning and meticulous detail. In his world of high finance, missteps were costly, and foresight was paramount. Now, faced with the ultimate betrayal, he turned those same skills toward a far darker purpose. What Sophia and Ryan had stolen from him was not just his trust, it was his dignity, his control, and the life he had so carefully built. Ethan would reclaim it all, but not through rash action. No, his revenge would be methodical, precise, and absolute. The first step was research. Alone in his office late into the night, Ethan combed through articles, books, and case studies on criminal psychology and forensic science. He studied past murders, both solved and unsolved, taking careful note of the methods that succeeded and the mistakes that led to capture. He wasn't interested in merely killing Sophia, he wanted to ensure that Ryan took the fall. The plan had to be perfect, down to the smallest detail. Ethan began by building a narrative that would point directly to Ryan. He collected Ryan's belongings that had been left around the house during his frequent visits, a guitar pick, a pair of sunglasses, even an old hoodie. These items, insignificant in their original context, would soon become pieces of damning evidence. Ethan also started subtly manipulating Sophia and Ryan's communication. He accessed Sophia's phone when she left it unattended, sending messages to Ryan that hinted at tension and conflict. "We need to talk," one message read. "This can't go on like this." Ethan smiled as he imagined the confusion these messages would sow in Ryan's mind. The next step was to prepare the murder weapon. Ethan chose a knife from their kitchen, one with a distinctive handle that Ryan had once commented on during a family dinner. He wiped it clean, ensuring no fingerprints remained, and carefully stored it in a locked drawer. He also obtained a small vial of Ryan's blood. This was the most challenging part of his plan, but Ethan's sharp mind and methodical approach made it possible. During one of Ryan's visits, Ethan feigned an accident, cutting himself while preparing dinner and asking Ryan for help. As Ryan handed him a bandage, Ethan subtly swabbed a small sample of blood from his brother's hand. It was a small detail, but it would prove invaluable. The scene itself was just as carefully crafted. Ethan chose the garage for its relative isolation and ease of cleaning. He envisioned the scenario in his mind countless times, Sophia returning home, unsuspecting, greeted by a glass of wine laced with a powerful sedative. He practiced the motions, the timing, ensuring that when the moment came, there would be no hesitation. Ethan's emotions simmered just beneath the surface. There was no fiery rage, no tears of betrayal. What he felt was colder, more calculated, a chilling resolve to see his plan through. He took extra precautions to erase any trace of his involvement. He cleaned surfaces meticulously, wore gloves whenever he handled the knife, and ensured that any evidence he planted would lead investigators directly to Ryan. In the days leading up to the event, Ethan maintained his usual demeanor. At work, he was as focused as ever, closing deals and attending meetings as if nothing was amiss. At home, he was calm, even affectionate, lulling Sophia into a false sense of security. If she noticed any change in him, she didn't show it. To her, Ethan seemed to be slowly forgiving her, trying to mend their fractured marriage. But forgiveness was the furthest thing from Ethan's mind. What he was doing wasn't just about punishment, it was about control. Ethan had spent his entire life ensuring that he was the master of his own destiny. Sophia and Ryan had tried to take that from him, but they had underestimated just how far Ethan would go to protect what was his. The night arrived. The house was eerily quiet as Ethan prepared the final details. He poured 2 glasses of wine, slipping the sedative into Sophia's without a second thought. He rehearsed his lines in his head, picturing the moment she would walk through the door. His heart was steady, his mind sharp. There was no room for error. As the sound of Sophia's car pulling into the driveway echoed through the garage, Ethan positioned himself in the living room, wine glasses in hand. He heard the keys turn in the lock, the door creak open. Sophia's heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she entered, her voice calling out a casual, "Ethan, I'm home." Ethan smiled, a cold, calculated smile. The plan was in motion, and by the end of the night, nothing would ever be the same. The morning sun cast a pale light over Oakwood Drive as the neighborhood stirred to life. For most residents, it was an ordinary day, but for the Carter household, the quiet facade had been obliterated. Inside the garage, Sophia Carter lay motionless, a pool of blood beneath her still form. The knife, its distinctive handle unmistakable, was carefully placed nearby, smeared with her blood. The scene, meticulously staged by Ethan, told a story, one of rage, betrayal, and an uncontrollable crime of passion. Ethan made the call to the police, his voice quivering as he reported the discovery. He played his role perfectly, portraying a devastated husband stumbling upon his wife's lifeless body. His grief sounded genuine, his horror palpable. The responding officers arrived quickly, their professionalism masking the grim task ahead. As they entered the garage, the carefully planted evidence began to unfold before them. From the outset, suspicion fell on Ryan. The items Ethan had strategically placed, a guitar pick near Sophia's body, a bloodied hoodie left conspicuously on a chair, seemed to tie him to the scene inescapably. To any observer, the narrative was clear: Ryan, in a fit of rage, had killed Sophia in a confrontation that had spiraled out of control. The detectives pieced together the story based on the evidence before them and Ethan's carefully crafted statements. He recounted the growing tension he had noticed between Sophia and Ryan, sharing fabricated anecdotes of arguments and veiled threats. The text messages Ethan had planted on Sophia's phone further supported the idea that Ryan had become increasingly volatile in their clandestine relationship. It wasn't long before detectives paid Ryan a visit. Early that morning, he was awoken by the sound of urgent knocking at his apartment door. Still groggy, Ryan opened it to find two detectives standing in the hallway, their expressions grave. "Ryan Carter," one of them asked. Ryan nodded, confused. "Yeah, that's me. What's this about?" "You're under arrest for the murder of Sophia Carter." The words hit him like a freight train. His mind raced as they turned him around, cuffing his hands behind his back. "Wait, what? Murder? Sophia's dead. This has to be some kind of mistake." His protests were ignored as the officers led him to their car. At the station, Ryan found himself in a cold, sterile interrogation room. He sat at the metal table, his wrists still bound, as the detectives laid out the evidence. Every detail seemed to tighten the noose around him: the knife with his fingerprints, the bloodied hoodie, the text messages. "This doesn't make sense," Ryan insisted, his voice growing more desperate. "Yes, I loved her, but I would never hurt her. I didn't even know she was dead until you told me." The detectives remained impassive. "Ryan, we've seen this before. Affairs lead to heated arguments, and things get out of hand. Just tell us the truth." Ryan's head spun. He could see how the evidence painted him as the villain, but he knew it wasn't true. "I didn't kill her," he said firmly, though his voice wavered. "Someone is setting me up." "But who?" The question gnawed at him. He thought of Ethan and their strained relationship over the years. Could Ethan be behind this? The idea seemed impossible, yet the thought lingered. Meanwhile, Ethan observed from a distance as the events unfolded exactly as he had planned. The investigators accepted his narrative without question, and Ryan's history of instability, his struggling music career, his nomadic lifestyle, only solidified their case against him. Ethan maintained the demeanor of a grieving husband, answering their questions with the perfect balance of cooperation and sorrow. The media quickly latched onto the story, painting Ryan as a jealous lover who had snapped when Sophia refused to leave her husband. Headlines splashed his face across televisions and newspapers, labeling him as a killer driven by passion. Public opinion turned against him almost instantly. In the solitude of his holding cell, Ryan grappled with the weight of the accusations. He replayed every moment of the past few months, searching for answers, for a way to prove his innocence. But with every piece of evidence pointing to him, he couldn't see a way out. Ethan, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines with cold satisfaction. Every detail, every move he had made, had worked flawlessly. Ryan was trapped in a web of lies Ethan had spun, and as far as the world was concerned, justice was being served. But beneath the surface of his icy composure, Ethan couldn't shake a flicker of unease. He had played his hand perfectly, yet the thrill of control was fleeting. For now, he told himself, he had won. The walls were closing in on Ryan, and he was left with a haunting question of his own: how do you prove your innocence when the evidence is stacked so convincingly against you? As the days stretched on, the answer seemed increasingly out of reach. Ethan Carter had always prided himself on his composure. He was the consummate professional, the man who could remain unshaken under the weight of pressure. But as the days stretched on after Ryan's arrest, the very qualities that had served him well in his career began to work against him. For the detectives handling Sophia's case, Ethan's calm demeanor, initially perceived as strength, started to feel unnatural, eerily calculated. Detective Claire Matthews was the first to voice her doubts. She had been on the force long enough to know that grief didn't look the same for everyone, but something about Ethan's behavior gnawed at her. He answered questions with precision, never stumbling, never contradicting himself. It was almost too perfect. A man who's just lost his wife in such a brutal way shouldn't be this composed, she remarked to her partner, Detective James Coulson. It's like he's rehearsing. Her unease deepened as they reviewed Ethan's initial statements. The details he provided about Sophia and Ryan's supposed arguments felt overly curated, as if he was laying out a narrative for them to follow. While the evidence against Ryan was compelling, something about the case felt off. Claire's instincts told her they were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. The turning point came when they reviewed footage from the neighborhood security cameras. Ethan had claimed he had been home all night when Sophia was killed, but the footage told a different story. At 10:15 p.m., just after Sophia was supposed to have arrived home, Ethan's car was seen leaving the driveway. It returned an hour later, and then left again around midnight. The timeline didn't fit with his alibi. What's he doing driving around in the middle of the night? Coulson asked, his brow furrowed as he studied the footage. Whatever it is, Claire replied, he didn't want anyone to know about it. Armed with this new information, the detectives began digging deeper into Ethan's life. A search of his digital history revealed a chilling pattern. In the weeks leading up to Sophia's death, Ethan had searched for phrases like, how to frame someone for murder, and, perfect crime scenarios. He had also downloaded articles on forensic evidence and criminal psychology. When confronted with this information, Claire felt a cold certainty settle over her. This isn't a grieving husband, she said to Coulson. This is a man who planned every detail. The detectives decided it was time to revisit the crime scene, this time with Ethan in mind as a potential suspect. During their search of the house, they uncovered a hidden box in the garage containing gloves, cleaning supplies, and a small vial of blood, Ryan's blood. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. The pieces were falling into place. Ethan had not only orchestrated Sophia's murder but had meticulously planted evidence to frame his brother. The evidence painted a picture that was both horrifying and intricate. Ethan's calm demeanor, his calculated actions, and his apparent cooperation had all been part of a master plan to ensure he emerged unscathed while Ryan took the fall. When the detectives confronted Ethan with their findings, his facade began to crack. Gone was the composed, grieving husband. In his place was a man who had underestimated the thoroughness of the investigation. He denied everything at first, claiming the evidence had been planted, that someone was trying to frame him. But his protests rang hollow in the face of the mounting evidence. By the time the interrogation ended, the detectives had enough to secure a warrant for Ethan's arrest. As he was taken into custody, the once confident man looked shaken, his eyes betraying the fear he had worked so hard to suppress. Meanwhile, Ryan sat in his cell, unaware of the shift in the investigation. For days, he had battled despair, convinced his life was over. When the news finally reached him, that Ethan had been arrested and was now the prime suspect, he felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. The brother he had idolized and envied in equal measure had orchestrated not only his downfall but the death of the woman they both loved. As the truth about Ethan began to unravel, the case that once seemed open and shut transformed into a chilling tale of betrayal, manipulation, and calculated revenge. The detectives, though relieved to have uncovered the real culprit, couldn't shake the weight of the story they had uncovered. It wasn't just a murder, it was the complete dismantling of a family, driven by a man's unrelenting need for control. And for Ethan, the realization that his perfect plan had failed was the ultimate punishment, even before the trial began. The arrest of Ethan Carter sent shockwaves through the Charlotte community. What had initially seemed like an open-and-shut case against Ryan Carter now unraveled into a tale of betrayal and premeditated murder. The man who had presented himself as the grieving, wronged husband was now in handcuffs, accused of not only killing his wife but framing his own brother for the crime. Ethan was arrested at his office, where he was mid-conversation with a colleague about an upcoming deal. The sight of detectives entering the sleek, glass-walled conference room brought a hush over the normally bustling environment. Ethan's calm mask slipped for just a moment as they approached him, their expressions grim. "Ethan Carter," Detective Claire Matthews began, "you're under arrest for the murder of Sophia Carter and the attempted framing of Ryan Carter." Gasps rippled through the room as Ethan was cuffed and escorted out. His colleagues, who had always admired his professionalism and composure, looked on in stunned silence. Ethan kept his head high, his face a mask of stoicism, but his mind raced. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He had been so careful, so precise. Where had he gone wrong? At the police station, Ethan's initial interrogation was markedly different from Ryan's. He didn't beg or plead, he knew better than to appear desperate. Instead, he tried to discredit the evidence, insisting that someone was framing him. "I loved my wife," he said, his voice measured. "Why would I kill her? And my brother? Yes, we've had our differences, but I would never do something like this." But the detectives were prepared. They laid out the damning evidence piece by piece, the incriminating searches on his computer, the planted evidence, the vial of Ryan's blood found in his garage. Ethan's confidence faltered as the weight of their case became clear. For all his meticulous planning, he hadn't anticipated the relentless thoroughness of their investigation. The trial, which began a few months later, was a spectacle. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members, and curious onlookers eager to witness the downfall of a man whose calculated actions had torn his family apart. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of Ethan as a man consumed by the need for control, whose response to betrayal was not heartbreak but cold, calculated vengeance. Ryan took the stand, his testimony raw and emotional. He described his relationship with Sophia, his love for her, and his disbelief at being accused of her murder. But what gripped the courtroom most was his account of Ethan, the older brother he had looked up to, who had manipulated and framed him in the most heinous way imaginable. "I trusted him," Ryan said, his voice breaking. "He's my brother. I never thought he could do something like this, not to me. Not to her." The jury listened intently as the prosecution revealed the extent of Ethan's plan, from the staged evidence to his attempt to cast himself as the grieving widower. They presented the digital trail he had left behind, the methodical steps he had taken to frame Ryan, and the chilling precision with which he had carried out Sophia's murder. Ethan's defense team argued that his actions were driven by temporary insanity, momentary lapse brought on by the emotional devastation of discovering his wife's affair. They tried to paint him as a broken man, overwhelmed by betrayal. But the jury saw through the facade. The evidence of his deliberate planning and execution left no room for doubt. As the trial progressed, Ethan's icy composure began to crack. The weight of the testimonies, the evidence, and the realization that his carefully orchestrated plan had failed bore down on him. By the time closing arguments were made, Ethan looked like a shadow of the man who had walked into the courtroom on the first day. The verdict was swift. After just 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Ethan Carter guilty of first-degree murder and attempted framing. The judge handed down a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the gavel fell, the courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs. Ethan sat motionless, his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table. For Ryan, the verdict was a bittersweet moment. He was free, his name cleared, but the scars of what had happened would never truly fade. The loss of Sophia, the betrayal by his brother, and the public scrutiny had left him deeply shaken. As Ethan was led out of the courtroom, shackled and flanked by officers, he cast one final look at Ryan. It wasn't anger or regret that filled his eyes, it was the haunting realization that he had lost everything. His plan, brilliant as it seemed in his own mind, had unraveled, leaving him with nothing but a lifetime to reflect on his failure. For the Carters, the trial marked the end of a tragedy that had destroyed their family. For the world watching, it was a sobering reminder of how betrayal, obsession, and a thirst for control could lead even the most composed of men to ruin. The trial of Ethan Carter had ended, but its ripple effects were far from over. The once imposing figure of Ethan, now a convicted murderer, was reduced to an inmate in a maximum security prison. His life of precision and power was replaced by cold steel bars and the monotony of a cell. For the man who had thrived on control, the ultimate punishment was its complete absence. For Ryan Carter, freedom brought a complicated mix of emotions. The weight of being accused of a crime he hadn't committed had been lifted, but the scars of the ordeal were deep. Sophia's death, the love they had shared, and the betrayal of his own brother were wounds that would take years, if not a lifetime, to heal. In the months following the trial, Ryan withdrew from the public eye, retreating to a quiet life far from Charlotte. Music, once his greatest passion, became a painful reminder of what he had lost. The public, captivated by the twisted tale of love, betrayal, and murder, moved on to the next headline, but those closest to the story couldn't escape its shadow. The Carter family, fractured beyond repair, struggled to reconcile the reality of what had happened. Ethan's parents, devastated by the loss of Sophia and the actions of their eldest son, were left to pick up the pieces of a family torn apart. Their grief was compounded by guilt. Had they missed the signs? Could they have done something to prevent it? In the quiet aftermath of the trial, Detective Claire Matthews often found herself reflecting on the case. It wasn't the evidence or the courtroom drama that haunted her, it was the human tragedy at its core. She had seen many crimes in her career, but this one felt different. It wasn't born of desperation or impulsivity. It was the result of cold, calculated decisions made by a man who had allowed his need for control to eclipse his humanity. Ethan's actions had destroyed more than just lives, they had eroded trust, love, and the bonds that tied a family together. It was a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked obsession, of how far a person could go when they felt their power slipping away. Ryan, trying to rebuild his life, found solace in small, quiet victories. A walk in the park without being recognized, a conversation with an old friend who didn't ask about the case, a moment of peace when the memories didn't feel so heavy. He knew he would never fully escape what had happened, but he also knew that moving forward was the only option. Ethan, in the isolation of his prison cell, had nothing but time to reflect. For a man who had always prided himself on his ability to foresee every outcome, the irony was bitter. The one variable he hadn't accounted for was himself. His arrogance, his belief that he could control every piece of the puzzle, had been his undoing. He replayed the events over and over in his mind, each time reaching the same conclusion. His failure wasn't in the details of his plan, it was in his inability to accept that some things were beyond his control. The story of the Carters became a cautionary tale, a chilling example of how love, when tainted by betrayal and obsession, could lead to unthinkable consequences. For those who heard it, it was a reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the destructive power of unchecked emotions. The house on Oakwood Drive, once a symbol of success and stability, remained empty for months after the trial. Its walls, which had once echoed with laughter and life, now stood silent, a haunting testament to the events that had unfolded within. The neighbors, once enamored with the Carter family's picture-perfect image, avoided the house, as if its tragedy might somehow taint their own lives. In the end, the Carter family's story left behind more questions than answers. What drives a man to such extremes? Is it love, or is it the loss of power and control that cuts deeper than betrayal itself? And for those left in the wake of such devastation, how do they find the strength to carry on? For Ryan, the answer lay in the simplest of truths: life, no matter how shattered, must go on. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be the same, but it was still worth living. For Ethan, there were no such revelations. His world, once vast and full of potential, had shrunk to the size of a cell. His punishment wasn't just the loss of freedom, it was the realization that he had orchestrated his own downfall. The Carter family's story, while extraordinary in its twists and turns, was ultimately a human one. It was a story of love and loss, of ambition and control, and of the devastating consequences when trust is broken and obsession takes hold. As the world moved on, the lessons it left behind lingered, a stark warning of how easily the lines between love and destruction can blur.